The moment I signed that credit card receipt for $5,000 at my foster family's birthday dinner, something inside me died. Or maybe it was born. I'm still not sure which. My name is Aurora Vance, though for 20 years I carried the last name Hayes like a borrowed coat that never quite fit. I was 5 when my parents died in a car accident, leaving me with nothing but a trust fund I didn't know existed and a family who saw me as their charity project. The Hayes family took me in, and I spent the next 2 decades learning exactly what it meant to be grateful for scraps while others feasted. That night at the restaurant, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the soft murmur of Manhattan's elite, I should have known something was coming. Victoria Hayes, my foster sister, had been shooting me looks all evening, the kind that made my skin crawl. She was 30 now, still living off her parents' money, still treating me like the unwanted puppy they'd found on their doorstep decades ago. I sat at the far end of the table, wearing a simple black dress I'd bought on sale 3 years ago. Around me, the Hayes family glittered in designer labels and diamond jewelry. Mr. Hayes was celebrating his 60th birthday, and the restaurant they'd chosen cost more per plate than I made in a week at the nonprofit where I worked. Victoria leaned across the table, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the white tablecloth. Her voice was sugar-sweet, the kind of tone that always preceded something cruel. "Oh, Aurora, honey, why are you sitting here? This table is for real family. Maybe you should find another seat, perhaps closer to the restrooms?" The words hit me like a slap, but it was the silence that followed that hurt worse. Mrs. Hayes adjusted her pearls and looked away. Mr. Hayes suddenly became fascinated by his wine glass. Richard, my foster brother, actually laughed, reaching over to nudge my chair so it rocked slightly. I'd heard worse over the years. I'd been called ungrateful, a burden, a charity case more times than I could count, but something about that moment, with all those wealthy strangers as witnesses to my humiliation, made my hands shake. I stayed in my seat. I made it through the dinner, forcing down expensive food that tasted like ash in my mouth. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I stayed quiet, just like I'd learned to do. Then came dessert, and with it, Victoria's final performance. She pulled out the bill with a theatrical flourish, sliding it across the table until it stopped directly in front of me. $5,000. I stared at the numbers, my vision blurring slightly. "Consider this a thank you," Victoria said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "For all those years our family took care of you, fed you, clothed you, gave you a home when no one else wanted you." The restaurant seemed to tilt. I thought about the hand-me-down clothes I'd worn to school while Victoria got shopping trips to Fifth Avenue. I thought about walking 3 miles each way because I wasn't allowed to drive the family cars. I thought about working 2 jobs through college while Richard's tuition was paid in full, his fraternity dues covered, his spring break trips funded without question. My hands trembled as I pulled out my credit card. It was the one I saved for emergencies, already carrying a balance I was slowly paying down. I watched Victoria's smile grow wider as I signed the receipt. That smile would haunt me for months afterward. I left the restaurant in silence, walking to the subway station in my worn heels, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest where my heart used to be. The night air was thick with summer heat, and somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. I felt like screaming too. My apartment in Brooklyn was small enough that I could see the entire space from the doorway. I threw my purse on the kitchen table and stared at the credit card receipt I'd stupidly kept. $5,000. Money I didn't have. Money I'd now be paying off for years, with interest. The memories came flooding back, uninvited and relentless. I was 8 years old again, watching through the window as Victoria got her first pony for Christmas. I got a used book about horses. I was 12, walking past Richard's shiny new sports car to reach my rusty bicycle. I was 16, overhearing Mrs. Hayes tell a friend that they kept me around because it looked good for their charitable reputation. There was only one person in the Hayes family who'd ever seen me as more than a tax deduction. Eleanor Vance, the grandmother, Mr. Hayes' mother. She had a different last name because she'd kept her first husband's name after remarrying. She'd always seemed separate from the rest of them, like she could see through their polished veneer to something rotten underneath. I remembered sitting in her garden when I was 14, crying because I'd been excluded from another family vacation. She'd taken my hand and said something I'd never forgotten. "You don't need anyone to give you worth, Aurora. You'll build it yourself." I hadn't understood then. I was beginning to understand now. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "Miss Vance? This is Jonathan Caldwell, attorney for Eleanor Vance. Mrs. Vance has requested your presence at her home in the Hamptons this Saturday at 2 p.m. It's a matter of significant importance." I almost didn't go. The Hayes family had a way of turning every gathering into another opportunity to remind me of my place, but something in the lawyer's tone made me curious. And Eleanor had always been kind to me. The drive to the Hamptons took 3 hours on the bus. I couldn't afford a car, much less the gas money. By the time I arrived at Eleanor's estate, the sun was high and hot, making the massive White House shimmer like a mirage. Eleanor met me at the door herself, which was unusual. She was 85 now, thin and fragile looking, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Aurora, come in, dear. We have much to discuss." The living room was already occupied. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes sat stiffly on the cream-colored sofa. Victoria perched on an armchair, scrolling through her phone with studied disinterest. Richard stood by the window, drink already in hand despite it being early afternoon. And there was Caldwell, the lawyer, with a briefcase that looked expensive enough to feed me for a month. Eleanor didn't waste time on pleasantries. She moved to stand in front of the fireplace, and despite her frail appearance, she commanded the room. "I've asked you all here to inform you of changes I've made to my will." Mrs. Hayes' smile was indulgent, the kind you'd give a confused elderly relative. "Mother, we've been through this. Everything is already arranged." "It was arranged," Eleanor said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "It is no longer." She nodded to Caldwell, who opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "As of last week, Eleanor Vance's entire estate, including all property, stocks, bonds, and controlling interest in Vance Industries, will pass to Aurora Vance upon Mrs. Vance's death." The room exploded. Richard's wine glass hit the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 red-stained pieces. Victoria shot to her feet, her face contorting with rage. "What? That's insane. She's not even blood." "She's more family than any of you have ever been," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the chaos. She turned to Caldwell. "Show them the rest." Caldwell pulled out more documents, spreading them across the coffee table. "These are bank records from 2005. They show that when Aurora's parents died, they left a trust fund of $600,000 for her care and education. Records show this money was transferred to accounts controlled by Mr. and Mrs. Hayes as her legal guardians." My vision went dark at the edges. $600,000. I'd had money. My parents had left me money. That money was used for her care, Mr. Hayes said, but his voice lacked conviction. "According to these records," Caldwell continued, his tone professionally neutral, "the money was withdrawn in large sums over the years. None of these withdrawals correspond to expenses related to Aurora's care. In fact, the timing suggests they were used for other family expenses. Victoria's horse, Richard's car collection, the renovation of your summer home." "You stole from me," I heard myself say. My voice sounded strange, distant. "You took my parents' money and you made me feel grateful for table scraps." Victoria lunged toward me, but Eleanor stepped between us. Despite her age, despite her fragile appearance, she was a wall. "You will sit down, or you will leave. Your choice." "This is manipulation," Mrs. Hayes said, her composure finally cracking. "You're not thinking clearly, Mother. This girl has poisoned your mind against your own family." Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My mind is perfectly clear enough to see what you've all become. Clear enough to know that the only decent thing to come out of this family in decades is standing right here, and she doesn't even share your blood." She walked over to me, taking my hands in hers. They were cold and thin, but her grip was firm. "I'm sorry, Aurora. I should have done this years ago. I should have protected you better." I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, years of pain and confusion and desperate hoping finally crystallizing into understanding. "Why now?" I managed to whisper. "Because I'm dying," Eleanor said simply. "Cancer. The doctors give me months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. And I'll be damned if I let these vultures pick over my bones and continue tormenting you with resources that should have been yours all along." The Hayes family left in a storm of threats and accusations. Victoria screamed at me that I was a manipulative snake, that I'd orchestrated all of this. Richard smashed another glass on his way out. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes were silent, but their faces were masks of cold fury. When the door finally closed behind them, I collapsed into the nearest chair. Eleanor sat beside me, and for a long moment, we just breathed together. "They're going to fight this," I said. "Let them fight," Eleanor replied. "The will is ironclad. The evidence of their theft is irrefutable, and Caldwell here is the best attorney in New York." Caldwell nodded. "We're prepared for a legal battle, Miss Vance, but I'm confident in our position." "They'll try to destroy me first," I said, thinking of Victoria's face, twisted with rage. Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Then we'll face them together. And Aurora, we're going to win." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. The media storm hit faster than I anticipated. Within days, the story had leaked. Victoria took to every talk show that would have her, crying on cue, painting herself as the victim of a scheming interloper who'd manipulated a sick old woman. I watched her on morning television, tissue in hand, voice breaking as she described how I'd isolated Eleanor from her family, how I'd taken advantage of her declining mental state. The host was sympathetic. The audience nodded along. By the time the segment ended, I was trending on social media as a gold digger and worse. Richard hired a private investigator to dig through my life. Suddenly, my social media was full of old photos taken out of context, innocent coffee meetings with friends twisted into evidence of secret plots. They found a parking ticket from 3 years ago and spun it into a pattern of lawlessness. Then came the hacking. My accounts were compromised, fake messages posted in my name, screenshots circulated of conversations I'd never had, photos doctored to show me in compromising situations. My phone buzzed constantly with hate messages from strangers who decided I was the villain in this story. Late one night, a text came from an unknown number. "Give it up, or you'll regret it. We're just getting started." I stared at that message for a long time, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to run, to disappear, to let the Hayes family have their victory. It would be easier than fighting. It would hurt less than staying in the spotlight while they tore me apart piece by piece. But then I thought about Eleanor, fighting cancer and fighting for me. I thought about the little girl I'd been, walking miles to school in worn-out shoes while Victoria complained about which luxury car to take. I thought about every time I'd stayed silent, every time I'd accepted their cruelty because I believed I deserved it. I called Caldwell. "I want to hold a press conference." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure? It could make things worse before they get better." "I'm sure. I'm done being silent." The press conference was held in a hotel conference room downtown. Reporters packed the space, cameras flashing, recorders thrust forward. Eleanor insisted on being there despite her weakening condition, sitting beside me in a wheelchair but radiating quiet strength. Caldwell stood at the podium, his presence commanding attention. He laid out the facts methodically. The trust fund, the bank records, Eleanor's medical evaluation by 3 independent doctors, all confirming her mental competency. He produced emails and text messages showing the Hayes family's coordinated campaign to destroy my reputation. The journalists took notes, asked questions. Some were skeptical, some seemed genuinely moved. I sat silently, letting Caldwell speak for me, until one reporter asked directly, "Miss Vance, what do you have to say to people who think you're just after the money?" I stood up, my legs steadier than I expected. "I don't want their money. I want justice." For 30 years, I was treated like I should be grateful for the privilege of being ignored, insulted, and used. I was 5 years old when my parents died, and instead of being given the care and love they'd arranged for me, I was made to feel like a burden while my foster family spent the money my parents left to ensure I'd be okay. My voice grew stronger as I continued. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here because I'm tired of pretending that abuse is acceptable when it comes from people who call themselves family. I'm tired of staying quiet while they profit from my pain, and I'm done apologizing for wanting what was rightfully mine all along." The room was silent for a beat, then the questions exploded again, but this time they felt different. People wanted to know more about the trust fund, about the evidence, about what it was like growing up in the Hayes household. Then Victoria burst through the doors. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared. She looked nothing like the composed woman who'd been on television days before. "Lies," she screamed. "All lies. You can't trust this snake. She's manipulated all of you." She tried to grab the documents from Caldwell's hands, but security intervened. The cameras captured everything, her face twisted with rage, her designer dress rumpled, her carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. "This isn't over," she hissed at me as security escorted her out. "We'll bury you." But the damage was done. The video went viral within hours. Social media, so quick to condemn me days before, shifted. People started asking questions. Other foster children began sharing their own stories of financial abuse. Journalists dug deeper into the Hayes family finances, finding discrepancies and questionable transactions. That's when Daniel Miller reached out. He was the investigative journalist with the New York Times, known for taking down corrupt politicians and corporate fraud. His email was brief. "I'd like to hear your full story. No agenda, just truth." We met at a small coffee shop in Queens, far from the media circus. Daniel was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much of humanity's worst. He listened as I talked, recording nothing, just taking occasional notes. "I believe you," he said when I finished. "I've been looking into the Hayes family for years, actually. Different story originally, some business dealings that seemed sketchy. But this is bigger." "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They're planning something. I have a source who says Richard's about to file a countersuit, claiming you coerced Eleanor. They're also trying to freeze all of Eleanor's assets before she dies, claiming incompetence." My stomach dropped. "Can they do that?" "They can try. Whether they'll succeed is another question." He paused, studying me. "You need more than just defense, Aurora. You need to go on offense." "How?" "Let me help you. I'll write the real story, the full investigation. Every financial record, every witness, everything. But more than that, you need leverage. You need to make them more afraid of you than you are of them." That's when Caldwell introduced me to Michael Thorne. Michael was a venture capitalist, the kind of man who moved markets with a phone call. He was in his 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. We met in his office overlooking Central Park. a space so luxurious it made the Hayes family's wealth look modest. "I've been following your situation," Michael said, offering me expensive coffee in a delicate cup. "Fascinating case. More importantly, I see potential." "Potential for what?" "Revenge." He smiled at my surprised expression. "I'm a businessman, Aurora. I understand leverage, power dynamics, the long game. The Hayes family thinks they can bully you into submission because they have money and connections. But money is just a tool. You need to learn how to use it." "I don't have money," I pointed out. "Not yet, but you will. Eleanor's estate is substantial. Even half of it would set you up for life. But why stop there?" He pulled out a tablet, showing me financial projections and business plans. "The best revenge isn't taking what they have. It's building something they could never achieve. It's becoming someone they have to respect, even as they hate you for it." I stared at the numbers on the screen, my mind racing. "You want to help me become rich?" "I want to help you become powerful. There's a difference." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying me. "The Hayes family has been playing a game for decades where they hold all the cards. It's time to change the game entirely. Are you interested?" I thought about Victoria's sneer, Richard's careless cruelty, the years of being made to feel small. "Yes," I said. "I'm interested." The lawsuit came as expected. Victoria and Richard filed jointly, claiming undue influence and questioning Eleanor's mental state. The media, now divided, covered every development. Some outlets portrayed me as a victim finally fighting back. Others still painted me as a manipulator. The case dragged through preliminary hearings, motions, and countermotions. Lawyers argued over medical records, financial statements, witnesses. Through it all, Eleanor's health declined. I visited her every week, watching her grow frailer, her once sharp mind occasionally fuzzing at the edges. "Don't let them see you waver," she told me during one visit, her voice weak but determined. "They're waiting for you to break, to give up, to prove them right about you." "I won't," I promised, holding her fragile hand. "I'm going to win this, for both of us." She smiled. "You already have, dear. You've found your spine. That's worth more than any inheritance." The trial began on a cold morning in February. The courthouse was packed with media, spectators, and the curious. I walked in wearing a suit Caldwell had helped me pick out, armor against the scrutiny. The Hayes family's lawyers were good. They painted Eleanor as senile, me as predatory. They brought in witnesses who claimed to have seen me isolating Eleanor, manipulating her, feeding her lies about her own family. Victoria took the stand and delivered an Oscar-worthy performance, tears streaming as she described the grandmother she'd lost to my influence. But Caldwell was better. He methodically dismantled their case, producing medical evaluations from 3 independent physicians who'd examined Eleanor specifically for this trial. All confirmed her mental competency. He showed phone records proving I'd actually visited Eleanor less frequently than Victoria had claimed, and that many of my visits had been at Eleanor's request, not my initiation. Then came the financial evidence. Caldwell walked the jury through every withdrawal from my trust fund, showing how each one coincided with major Hayes family expenses that had nothing to do with my care. He produced receipts, bank statements, even credit card records showing Victoria's shopping sprees and Richard's gambling debts, all funded by money that should have been mine. The courtroom was silent as he presented 20 years of systematic theft, laid out in undeniable detail. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head high. I told my story simply, without embellishment. I described the hand-me-down clothes while Victoria got designer labels, the long walks to school while Richard collected sports cars, the constant reminders that I should be grateful, that I was a burden, that I was lucky they'd taken me in at all. "I'm not here because I'm greedy," I said, looking directly at the jury. "I'm here because for my entire childhood, I was made to feel worthless while the people who were supposed to care for me stole everything my parents left to ensure I'd be okay. I'm here because I refuse to be silent anymore about abuse, even when it comes from people society says I should be grateful to." The defense tried to rattle me on cross-examination, but I'd lived through years of Victoria's verbal attacks. Their lawyers' questions felt almost gentle by comparison. Then came the moment that sealed the case. The defense called Mrs. Hayes to the stand, hoping for sympathy from a mother defending her family. But Caldwell's cross-examination was surgical. "Mrs. Hayes, you testified that Aurora was treated like a daughter. Can you tell me what you spent on Aurora's college education?" We provided a home, food." The question was about college education specifically. "How much?" "I don't recall the exact." "Let me help you." Caldwell produced a document. "Records show you spent $0 on Aurora's education. Meanwhile, you paid $180,000 for Richard's 4 years at Columbia, plus an additional $50,000 for his master's degree. Would you say that's equal treatment?" Mrs. Hayes' composure cracked. "Richard is our son. Aurora is..." "Is what, Mrs. Hayes? Is not your real daughter? Is less deserving of the money her parents left specifically for her care and education?" The courtroom buzzed. The judge called for order. "Mrs. Hayes sat on the stand, tears running down her carefully made-up face, but unlike Victoria's theatrical performance, these tears looked like shame. Victoria couldn't help herself. She stood up from her seat, screaming, "This is all lies! That ungrateful bitch is twisting everything!" The judge's gavel came down hard. "Miss Hayes, you will control yourself or you will be removed from this courtroom." But Victoria was beyond control. She tried to rush toward me, face twisted with rage, and it took 2 bailiffs to restrain her. As they dragged her out, still screaming obscenities, I saw the jury's faces. Whatever sympathy the Hayes family might have had evaporated in that moment. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered the verdict. Eleanor's will was valid and would stand. Furthermore, the court ordered the Hayes family to pay restitution of $1.8 million, the original trust fund plus interest, for the misappropriation of my inheritance. Victoria's scream echoed through the courtroom. Richard slumped in his seat, face white. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes sat frozen, the reality of their loss finally sinking in. I felt Eleanor squeeze my hand. She was crying but smiling. "You did it," she whispered. "You stood up and you won." The next few weeks blurred together. The verdict was front-page news. Daniel Miller's comprehensive investigation published, laying bare decades of the Hayes family's financial manipulations and social cruelty. Public opinion completed its shift. I went from gold digger to survivor, from manipulator to victim, finally getting justice. But justice felt hollow when, 6 weeks after the trial, Eleanor passed away in her sleep. I was there, holding her hand, when she took her last breath. She looked peaceful, finally free from pain, but the loss hit me harder than I expected. She'd been the only person in that family who'd ever truly seen me, truly valued me, and now she was gone. The funeral was small. I'd half expected the Hayes family to make a scene, but they stayed away. Maybe they didn't want to face the media circus that would have erupted. Maybe they simply knew they weren't welcome. I stood at Eleanor's grave and made a promise. I would honor her memory not by dwelling on the pain of the past, but by building something meaningful with the future she'd given me. I would become the woman she'd believed I could be. With Caldwell's guidance and Michael Thorne's strategic advice, I established the Eleanor Vance Foundation. The mission was simple: protect and support foster children, especially those being financially exploited by their guardians. We would provide legal aid, financial audits for suspicious cases, and scholarships for kids trying to escape difficult situations. The foundation grew faster than I'd imagined. Other survivors of financial abuse came forward with their stories, offering to help. Lawyers volunteered their time, donors contributed. Within 6 months, we'd helped 37 children escape situations similar to mine. But I didn't stop there. Michael had been right. The best revenge was building something undeniable. I took the business courses I'd always wanted but could never afford. I learned to invest, to negotiate, to see opportunities where others saw obstacles. The portion of Eleanor's estate that wasn't devoted to the foundation, I grew. Carefully, methodically, with Michael as my mentor. A year after the trial, I launched my first business venture, a consulting firm helping nonprofits optimize their finances and reach. It was personal, meaningful, and surprisingly profitable. Then came a tech startup focused on financial literacy for underprivileged youth. Then investments in companies aligned with my values. Each success felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that the Hayes family had tried to crush. I saw Richard once during that year, at a business networking event. He looked terrible, his face puffy, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight. Word was his gambling problem had spiraled, that he'd blown through what remained of his trust fund, trying to recover losses. He saw me across the room and quickly left. Victoria tried to contact me multiple times. First came the angry emails, calling me every name she could think of. Then came the legal threats, empty attempts at intimidation. Finally came the desperate messages, asking for help, for money, for forgiveness. Her divorce had been brutal and public. Her ex-husband's lawyers had ensured she walked away with almost nothing, her reputation too tarnished for any lucrative settlement. I deleted each message without responding. Some people might call that cruel. I called it self-preservation. I'd given the Hayes family 20 years of my life. I wouldn't give them another moment. The only time I almost wavered was when Mrs. Hayes showed up at my office. She looked old, older than she should have, her designer clothes replaced with something off the rack. She asked to see me, and against my better judgment, I agreed to 10 minutes. She sat across from my desk, this woman who'd watched me suffer and done nothing, and tried to apologize. "We were wrong," she said, her voice small. "I was wrong. I should have treated you better, should have protected you." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. At first you were supposed to be temporary, then you became convenient. Then it became easier to see you as less than, because admitting otherwise would mean facing what we'd become." She looked up at me, mascara smudged. "I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, does it?" "No," I said, not unkindly. "It doesn't. Is there anything I can do? Any way to... There's nothing. I interrupted. You can't undo 20 years of pain. You can't give me back my childhood. The best thing you can do is learn from this and be better to the next person who needs your help. She left crying, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even pity, just emptiness where she used to live in my head. Daniel's final article about my journey published exactly 1 year after the trial's conclusion. The headline read, "From Foster Child to Force of Nature, How Aurora Vance Turned Trauma into Triumph." The piece chronicled everything, from my parents' death to Eleanor's will, from the Hayes family's cruelty to the foundation's success, from my lowest moments to my current position as a rising business leader and advocate. The response was overwhelming. Speaking invitations poured in. Business opportunities multiplied. Other foster children reached out, sharing their stories, asking for advice. I became, almost accidentally, a voice for a community that had been invisible for too long. Standing in my office one evening, looking out over Manhattan's glittering skyline, I thought about that night a year ago when I'd signed a $5,000 credit card receipt and felt something die inside me. I understood now that it was my willingness to accept abuse that had died. My belief that I deserved less than others. My silence in the face of cruelty. In its place, something else had been born. Not bitterness, though I'd certainly felt that along the way. Not a desire for revenge, though I'd achieved that too in my own way. What had been born was self-worth, the understanding that I didn't need anyone's permission to value myself. That I could build a life on my own terms, by my own rules. The Hayes family had tried to break me, to keep me small and grateful and silent. Instead, they'd forged something stronger than they'd ever been themselves. Eleanor had called it finding my spine. Michael called it becoming powerful. Daniel called it triumph. Over trauma. I called it freedom. My phone buzzed with a message from Caldwell. Victoria had declared bankruptcy. Richard was entering rehab after his 3rd DUI. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes had sold their house and moved to a small condo in New Jersey, their social circle having disappeared along with their money. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite pity, not quite satisfaction. They'd made their choices, just as I'd made mine. The difference was, I'd chosen to build while they'd only known how to take. I'd chosen to help others while they'd only helped themselves. I'd chosen to grow beyond my pain while they'd wallowed in theirs. There would be no dramatic final confrontation, no movie moment where I stood over their defeat and gloated. That wasn't the story I wanted to tell. Instead, my revenge was quieter, more profound. I simply became someone they could never have imagined I'd be, someone they'd never believed I could be. I pulled up the Foundation's latest report. In the past year, we'd helped 238 foster children. We'd identified and stopped 47 cases of financial abuse. We'd provided over $1 million in scholarships, and we were just getting started. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory. The sweetest revenge isn't destroying them. It's building a life they never believed you could achieve. She'd been right. I wasn't Aurora Hayes anymore, the forgotten foster child who'd learned to make herself small. I was Aurora Vance, the name my parents had given me, the name Eleanor had restored. And I was finally, fully, completely myself. The wolf they'd tried to keep caged had learned to hunt, and she'd built herself an empire.